Hello and welcome to a new vlog. Welcome if you're new here. Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a full-time university writing instructor and a part-time content creator and indie author. And this is going to be a writing vlog. It is still the beginning of May as I'm filming this. It is May the 4th. So May the 4th be with you to all of my fellow Star Wars fans. A little late, but May the 4th be with you just the same. Where are we at with writing? I did vlog on Tuesday going to Costco with mom. That was fun, and I did manage to do a little bit of writing. So on Monday, May 1st, so what you've missed basically since camp ended, on Monday I did 1,848 words. On Tuesday, as you will have seen in a previous vlog, I did 1,065. Yesterday, despite being absolutely exhausted because I got no sleep Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning, basically I was up until 4 a.m. Wednesday morning and then finally managed to fall asleep for about 5 hours. Yesterday was rough with a capital R, but I still managed. Late in the evening, I was writing until like 9:30, but I managed to get 1,047 words. So the manuscript is now up to 44,177. We got to 40K, just over 40K even, I think, on the last day of camp. So I'm at 44,177. So I've done about 4,100 plus words since camp ended just in the last 3 days. So that's not bad. That's really not bad. I did not need to write as much as I forced myself to write yesterday, but that's okay because my Scrivener daily word goal is now down to 962. So it's a good chunk under, it's a good dent under 1,000 words a day. So I want to keep chipping away at that if I can. It's gonna be really interesting to take this 2-week break because I'm gonna keep writing. So there's gonna be a big jump when I come back to vlogging after my break. I'm hoping it won't be, I really do want to embrace the idea of taking a break. So I'm gonna try to stick to around 1,000 words a day unless I'm feeling really, really good. Then I'll let myself write more. But if I take 2 weeks off, that's 14 days. So I might, that'd be about 14,000 words. That's wild to think about. It just shows though, like, you think 1,000 words a day, that's not much, but in 14 days, that's 14,000 words. That's a good amount. So small goals, they work. Like even 500 words a day would be 7,000 words in 2 weeks. So if ever you start beating yourself up because you feel like you're just not writing that much each day, just keep writing each day. Like every day you think, oh, I don't want to write because all I think I can manage today is a couple hundred words, sit down and write the couple hundred words, even if then you make yourself stop. Sometimes I'll sit down and think, okay, just do 200 words, and if you feel like doing more, go for it. But other days I've learned to just say, no, 200 words, and then I'm making myself stop. There is nothing wrong with small word counts. I feel like I've ranted about this a bit throughout Camp Nano, but I feel like during Nano months in particular, but just on AuthorTube and WriterTube in general, I feel like we glorify the 10K in one day and, you know, the 10K weekends or, you know, 5K in one day. We glorify these really high word count writing sessions, and no one, even professional, like full-time writers, like I'm convinced no one can maintain 10K in one day or even 5K in one day every day for like a month. No one can write that much. You can do 10K in one day, but then you're probably not gonna write for another few days after that, at least. And so it's like, yeah, you could write 10K in one day and then burn out and not write anything for the next 10 days, or you could just write 1K a day for 10 days and still get to the same number, right? So small word counts. I'm just learning that for myself, having a goal of 1,000 words a day or less is so much more sustainable for me and makes it so much easier for me to sit down at my desk and write. So today, it's Thursday, it's May 4th, as I've told you. It is 3:50 in the afternoon. I want to go for a walk because it's actually not 1,000,000 degrees outside. It's currently only 79, which is still warm for most of you watching this channel, I know. But for Arizona, 79 is really nice. So I do want to go for a walk. I'm already dressed in my walking clothes, but I really want to write. So I'm going to write for about an hour and 10 minutes. I will take some breaks in between to talk to you guys, but at 5 o'clock I want to stop, I think. I hope. I should. And go for my walk because then I need to do dinner and all of that. I do have a mug of peppermint tea that is probably getting cold now. No, it's the perfect temperature. Still warm and cozy, but not so hot it's gonna burn your mouth. I also have a little Madeleine that I got at Costco the other day. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking and drink my tea and start my writing, and let's maybe do some sprints. Let's see how far we can get if I do maybe 4 10-minute sprints. So let me pull up my timer. The first sprint is not going to be a lot, so maybe we'll give myself 12 minutes on this first sprint because that gives me 2 minutes to kind of get back into it. But we are currently working on chapter 9. I don't think I will finish chapter 9 today because I'm only about halfway through it, I think. But we should get close to the end of chapter 9, which is really good because we're getting kind of to the midpoint of the novel itself. So 12 minutes on the timer. Not an hour and 12 minutes. Oh gosh, abort. Okay, 0 hours and 12 minutes. Starting now. I have done 2 sprints. I did 12 minutes to start because it definitely took me a couple minutes to get into things. And then I did a 10-minute sprint, and now I'm at 528 words. So I'm more than halfway to my minimum goal. I definitely want to get to at least 962 words today, preferably at least 1,000. Although even getting to 1,000, it would just bring my goal tomorrow down to like 961. I'm still working on the same scene, but I think I'm close to finishing this scene. I think I will get this particular scene done in the next sprint, and then I think I can get a good chunk of the way into the next scene. Basically, this chapter has the scene I'm working on, the next scene, and then has a scene shift at the very, very end of the chapter that then leads into kind of my end of chapter cliffhanger, like what's going to happen next moment before it switches to the next chapter. So, which is chapter 10. And so I'm pretty much right at that midpoint. So chapter 10 is when all the midpoint action happens, but the end of chapter 9 kind of launches you into that, if you will. So yeah, it's exciting, but it's kind of weird that I'm already like almost halfway through the book and almost halfway through the word count. It's a little early to tell where I'm going to be in relation to 100K. I feel like I'm getting through some of these chapters in less words than I thought I was going to. And so it's making me wonder if I'm going to come in around like 95,000 on the first draft of this, which would be fantastic. I would much rather be like 4,000 or 5,000 words under than 4,000 or 5,000 words over. I rarely ever have room to add stuff in my books. But in this vlog, I wanted to talk a little bit about plotting, and it seems appropriate since I'm kind of almost to the midpoint of this particular book. But I think it was, oh, do I have the screenshot? Whenever you guys ask me questions, I try to screenshot them so that I can remember who asked what and what exactly you asked. And yes, I did screenshot it. So Avi, I always mispronounce it. I feel like I want to say Avi, but then I second guess myself and think it should be Avi. So let me know. Help me out. I know you said I pronounced it correctly, but now I can't remember which pronunciation you said was correct. I think I want to say Avi because Avi the author. I want it to have the same ah sound. Anyway, I'm overthinking this. She says, I'm curious to know more about your plot process. Plot is my weakest area, so I'm often overwhelmed instead of drafting and getting it all figured out during the revising or editing process. I've used just about every plot structure: Snowflake Method, Harmon's Embryo, Freitag's Pyramid, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, Katie Tastic's 3 Acts, 9 Blocks, 27 chapters, and now Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Do you use any of those? If not, what, if any, plot structure do you follow? Also, what is your favorite part of writing? Plot, setting, character. For me, it's character, but I do love setting equally when the world is like a character itself. Okay, so there's a few questions in here. I want to discuss all of them. Favorite part of writing is definitely the plot. Like, I love uncovering the story. I do love setting and character. And so it's hard for me to like there are 3 legs of a stool, and the stool's not useful if you knock one leg out, right? So like you need all 3. And so I enjoy all 3. But I think coming up with the story, that was my gut instinct. Now I'm starting to second guess that because like character is the best. But setting I definitely like, especially like writing Independent Hearts. I love, like, this is my 3rd go around with this series. I love returning to Olsenburg. It's a fictional town, but it's based on a real place that I have history with. I just love writing the high street. I love writing each of the different shops and businesses, the surrounding area, and I love writing the seasons. I think season is a really important part of setting. Some authors, season is not really a thing for them, but for me, I love seasons. Like, I love seasons in general as a person. So as a writer, seasons are really important to me. So setting is really important. I love writing across the pond because I love writing London. London to me is almost an additional character in the across the pond books. So yeah, setting is really important. As far as plot structure, so like you've listed off a ton of plot structures, and I've only heard of a handful of these. I've heard of Snowflake Method, but I don't know exactly what it is. I've heard Save the Cat in general. I don't know 9 Blocks. I don't know 27 chapters. Harmon's Embryo, Freitag's Pyramid. Never heard of those. I don't know Katie Tastic's 3 Acts. I know the 3-act and 5-act structures from a playwriting perspective because I studied theater for so many years. But even then, I was never a playwriting major. Like, I did costume design and acting. I can't remember exactly what the 3 and 5 act structures are, but like, just I think I have kind of internalized a little bit. So like talking about my plot method, I definitely have internalized a lot of plot structure. I need to look up some of these. I probably have used some of these or have read books that have used these. And so my plot structure that I do use a pretty similar plot structure in all of my novels. But that has been something that I have developed over the years based on all the novels I have read. So I don't use one particular plot structure, but I tend to use a combination. The one that I probably most closely align with is, I think it's by Gwen Hayes, and it's called Romancing the Beat. And I definitely know I have read a bunch of romance novels that have used romancing the beat as their structure. That definitely influences my writing, but I also am definitely influenced by 3-act and 5-act play structure. I think a lot of novelists, and I don't want to say good novelists, a lot of novelists these days, and I would put myself in this camp, don't use, okay, how do I want to say this? What the impression that I've gotten from all the different books that I've read, it's not necessarily that plot structure is dependent on traditional publishing versus indie publishing, but I do think these more specific plot structures, like the ones you've listed, like Romancing the Beat, and some of the other ones that I'm aware of, those tend to work really well for indie authors who are trying to do a more rapid release and writing books faster, because these structures give you kind of a plug and play, fill in the blanks sort of situation for your outline. You know that this needs to happen at this point, and this needs to happen at this point, and so on and so forth throughout the novel. And so you've got these very specific plot points that your book has to hit, and you just decide what's going to happen at each of those points. Which, if you're trying to write 2 or 3 or 4 books or more each year, that's really useful. There are some romance authors who I know definitely use some variation of Romancing the Beat. Like, I don't know from their own words, but just reading their books and reading enough of their books, like once you've read 3 or 4 books by some authors, you start to see their plots follow almost the exact same sequence. It's just what happens is what is different. I think for indies who are writing at a much faster rate than traditionally published authors, these different structures make writing at that pace much easier. Whereas I think a lot of traditionally published authors, particularly literary fiction, which I'm not the biggest fan of literary fiction, but I feel like literary fiction is harder to pin down to a particular plot structure. At most, they might follow a generic 3-act or 5-act, but kind of the whole thing of literary fiction is to not be like everyone else. Or literary fiction will follow, and I think a lot of traditionally published authors also kind of follow, and this might be also a difference between the editors in a traditionally published setting. This is a long ramble, but I hope you're following me. And again, this is just like my impressions, my hunch, my suspicion. I think more traditional plot structures, like some that you haven't mentioned, like 3-act, 5-act, like Hero's Journey, Heroine's Journey, which if you haven't read the book Heroine's Journey, highly recommend it. I'm blanking on the author's name. I'll put it up on the screen here. Loved that book so much. I think there's elements of Heroine's Journey in my books, so I'm definitely a bit of a magpie when it comes to plotting. I feel like I use a bit of 3-act and like what I've learned from plot structure from theater and film and TV. I use a little bit of Romancing the Beat because I'm trying to stick within what is popular within the romance genre, and I also use a bit of Heroine's Journey, I think, in terms of the main character of my books never tries to solve problems alone. She's got a whole crew around her. That's a key component of Heroine's Journey compared to Hero's Journey. So I use a combination of plots, but I've kind of developed my own structure that I use. I will talk about that after I've done some more writing. So let me do another sprint or 2, and then I'll talk about my specific structure and like what I've cobbled together and how I start plotting my books a little bit. But we definitely need to get back to doing some writing first. Okay, it's 5 o'clock. I want to keep writing, but I also really want to go for a walk. I'm at 969 words, so I have met my goal for Scrivener. We're also at 45,146 words, so that's exciting. And I'm making progress on chapter 9, so I'm at 3,216 words total in the chapter. And I've kind of finished the one scene, and I'm moving on, like I'm transitioning into the next scene. But this next scene also is probably might only be like 1,000 word scene. It might be closer to a 2,000 word scene, so we'll see. But anyway, we were going to talk about how I plot. So I've talked about plot structures in general, but as for how I plot, I talk about this a little bit in my how I outline my books video, so kind of how I use Scrivener for outlining, but I also talk about my outlining process in general in that video. So I did talk about some of these things, but I'm definitely a like fill in the gaps kind of plotter and outliner. So there are certain key moments that I know need to happen. There's always some sort of inciting incident at the beginning that sets off the action and like thrusts the characters into the plot of the novel. Something has to happen that gives the reader a reason to keep reading. And then there's always the midpoint. Something happens in the middle. And so then you've got at the end the climax and the resolution. And the climax always has something that leads up to it. In romance, the very typical plot is somewhere in the beginning you have the meet cute. You've got your two main characters who meet, or something that establishes their romance. Maybe they already know each other, but there's just something that just makes them feel like, oh, maybe this relationship isn't what we thought it was. So there's some sort of meeting of the couple, establishing the relationship in the beginning. And then the midpoint usually is where something drastically changes for one or both of them. The whole kind of idea behind the midpoint is that it flips everything the characters know to be true upside down, or like that's one popular midpoint. I think there's different things you can do, and I try not to get too formulaic with my plot. So like this is my general structure: inciting incident, meet cute, all of that's kind of at the beginning. Midpoint, stuff that rises up to the midpoint, stuff that just is like happening and making things feel like are things what I think they are for the character? Do I really know what life is? Kind of a thing. As you get close to that midpoint, they should be starting to question some of those things a little bit and wondering if what they perceive is accurate or not. And then the midpoint happens and they're like, okay, maybe not. So I always establish when I'm outlining my inciting incident, my meet cute, how all of that's going to get started, what's going to happen in the middle that kind of just throws everything on its head or just really sets the main character's world spinning a bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it has to be something that makes them question life as they knew it and has to make them start making some decisions. And so then that second half, as you go from the midpoint to the climax, is then the series of events that are from the fallout of the midpoint. What decisions are they making? What are the consequences, good or bad, of those decisions? And how does that then lead into the plot point? In romance, you've got the meet cute. You also typically have something that threatens to tear the main characters apart, whether that's a love triangle, rumors of an affair, someone having to move to another country, or something. There's something that happens that threatens to tear the main characters apart. This can sometimes get really formulaic, and I feel like with romance, there's a fine line between following tropes, meeting reader expectations for the genre, creating a good amount of drama, versus being predictable, just doing what has been done a million times. And so the challenge as a writer is to find a new way to do those things so that it doesn't feel like I've seen this before, I've read this before. So the trick is not to find new plots, but the trick is to find new spins on old plots. I think part of it is, like, as a reader, there's certain romance novels, and I'd even put some of mine in here. You know I'm going to give you a happy ever after, right? You know that things are going to overall end up good for my characters. Love will prevail. It's not a question of, and I think this is where some writers can start overthinking things. It's not that the reader is wondering if the characters are going to get back together. It's wondering how they're going to get back together. It's not that it's whether the reader believes it. It's whether it's believable to the character. And I think this is where some people, if romance isn't their main genre, they can feel like, oh gosh, like, well, of course the character isn't going to do that. Or like, of course, like, it's not real that they're really breaking up because, like, it's a romance. So duh, they're going to get back together. I didn't believe it. It's not whether you believe it. The goal of the writer, the goal of the author, I feel, is it believable for that character? Not would you do it? Because we'd all do things very differently from the characters that we read in our books. We all are reading some of these books thinking, that's not what I would do. So that's not the point. As an author, that's not what I'm thinking about. What I'm thinking about is not, would Andrea do this? Does Andrea believe that this is the smart thing to do? It's, does this character, have I written them in a way that this decision, this choice they're making makes sense? And that's, I think, something important to keep in mind as both a reader and as a writer. As a reader, I try to be very careful not to think about, well, what would I do as Andrea? Because I'm not the one living this journey. It's, has the author written this character in such a way that when they decide to push the main male character away to protect them or something, is it believable for that character? Has that character been written in such a way that I believe that she thinks that's truly the best thing to make? Even if I disagree with it, even if I think, well, this would have all, been better if you'd just done this thing differently 10 chapters ago, then we wouldn't have a novel to read. Like, sometimes I think readers, especially of romance or sci-fi, like genre fiction in general, there is a suspension of disbelief that as a reader we have to go through, because almost every novel ever written would be done if someone had made a smarter decision in chapter 1. So you can't, I don't feel it's fair to criticize characters for making what we perceive as silly decisions, because that's the whole point of the story, So, and plot tropes like forced proximity or enemies to lovers or fake relationships, we all know where that plot is going to go. And if the character had just made the decision from the beginning, I'm not going to pretend to be your girlfriend, fiance, wife, whatever, then everyone's lives would be much less chaotic, but we also wouldn't have a novel to read. So I feel like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. ADD moment, I'm sorry, but it's still relevant. I'm going to get back to writing. There was one more part, I think, of obvious question, yes, that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to do some more writing, and then I will finish up my thoughts on plotting, because I've got one more thing to say. But I want to see if I can get to at least 1,200 words, and then we'll finish up this vlog and I can go for my walk. I managed 1,359 words today. I'm very happy with that. I really, really am. So the last thing I wanted to touch on from Avi's question, you mentioned that plot is your weakest area, so I'm often overwhelmed instead of drafting and getting it all figured out during the revision or editing process. So the way I'm reading this is you tend to do more plotting and fixing your plot issues while revising and editing, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm noticing that with Independent Hearts 3. I think there's going to be a fair amount of plot revision that I do in the editing. I think because my outline wasn't as strong for this one as it was for previous books, because I feel like Bookshop of Possibilities, I think my outline was like 20,000 words long for that one, and Inn of Hopes and Dreams, I think it was like 12 to 15,000. It was pretty long. I feel like my outline for this one, I only had like 250 to 500 words per chapter. It was pretty light compared to other book outlines I've done. So I feel like I'm discovering a lot of the plot as I'm writing. And I think this is where discussions of being a plotter versus a discovery writer can get a little bit muddied. I don't think that you're always one or the other. I feel like I'm doing a lot of discovery writing in this manuscript compared to others, even though I still have an outline. There's a lot that's kind of changing as I go. As a writing coach, as a writing teacher, like even though I don't coach or teach creative writing, even with writing an academic essay or something, outlines are great. Outlines are fantastic. I will always be a diehard outliner, but you still will never know everything you're going to say about the topic or the story that you're going to tell until you've written it all. So you shouldn't make yourself sick or get too overwhelmed when outlining, trying to plot the perfect book, because that's not going to happen. This kind of goes back to advice that I give about writing in general, because I think when it comes to things like writer's block, something a lot of people believe in but that I don't believe in, and as a result I've never had writer's block. I've had other kinds of creativity blocks from burnout, but writer's block as it's traditionally talked about I've never dealt with because I don't believe it exists. I think writer's block is a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's a whole separate discussion. But I think where writers can get hung up on writer's block or outlining block, and where you can get overwhelmed, is by trying to tell that perfect story from the beginning. As a writer, you need to know how to edit your own book. You need to be able to edit your own story, even if you still then pass it on to a professional editor, because that's where the story happens. And so I would kind of urge you to not get overwhelmed during the outlining and drafting process, and don't make yourself feel bad that you're figuring a lot of this out during the revision and editing process, because that's natural. That's where it should be happening. Everything that you write earlier in the process as part of outlining process, as part of the drafting process, that's where you're throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. That's where you're testing out things and seeing what works. What if the character does this? Ooh, no, I don't really like the direction that's going. Let's rewind. What if they do this instead? That still doesn't work. Rewind. What if they do this? Ooh, yes, that works. Now we move forward a little bit. What's the next decision they've got to make? Outlining and writing is moving in a linear fashion from one decision and choice a character makes to the next decision or choice they have to make. And then from that decision to the next decision, and the next, and the next, and the next. Outlining and writing and editing, these are all different levels and layers of the writing process in general. Writing a novel is never as simple as just writing it. It's never just the drafting process. So whether you're a plotter or a discovery writer, you're still going through all these different levels. You're still going through all these different steps of discovering the main points of the story, and then getting it to be a little bit more refined, and then a little bit more refined, and then more refined, more refined, more refined, until finally, at the end of all of the editing, you have your finished story. If you're finding that your plot doesn't really get discovered in its entirety until the editing process, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all. And if anyone has ever been made to feel by another writing teacher, by another YouTuber or writing guru or whoever, that there is something wrong with that, you need to ignore them. No one needs that kind of negativity in their lives. Your story is going to unfold itself in its own time. There is a bit of magic to this, and that's why I love Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. There is an element of magic to this. The story will not be rushed. Anyone who has tried to rush a story has discovered this. And so I didn't get this outline as far as I wanted, but that's okay, because I'm discovering more of the story as I'm writing the first draft, and by the end of the first draft, I'll have a much clearer idea of, okay, this is the story I'm telling. Here are all the main plot points. Here's where the gaps now are super obvious that I've missed something. There needs to be something that happens in chapter 3, and chapter 10, there's something really off there, and chapter 15 needs this or that. You won't discover that until you've written it. And so that's why I would tell plotters, I think this is one area where discovery writers have a slight jump on plotters. Discovery writers know they're not going to discover all of this until they get that first draft or that 0 draft written. Plotters often, I think a lot of the reason why some of us choose to be plotters, why that whole mentality aligns with us, we're control freaks. Let me know. If any of you are plotters and you're like, I am not a control freak, please let me know in the comments. But every plotter I have ever met has been a control freak to some extent or another. We want to try to control the story from the beginning. And discovery writing for a lot of plotters feels so overwhelming because we're giving up all of that control to our subconscious and our imagination, hoping that we'll get to the end eventually. Plotters think we can kind of figure out all of those main points and figure out that full trajectory before we even start writing. But it's all the writing process. As long as you arrive there in the end, that's what matters. And so if you're someone who is getting overwhelmed when you're writing because you feel like your plot isn't completely figured out, if you're someone who can never finish a first draft because your first chapter never feels good enough and so you don't move on, you will never know your full story until you let yourself write it. And the magic of arriving at your finished story comes in the editing, not in the writing. So you have to let yourself write. I think it's Jodi Picoult. I found this quote online. I use it in my first year writing syllabus because I think it's good advice to give my students. But she is credited as saying that you can always edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. And I've often said just that last part, you can't edit a blank page, so just start writing. But it's true. Your first draft shouldn't be perfect. You should not be striving for perfection with your first draft because you're always going to be disappointed. So just write the first draft. Let it be bad. Let it be chaotic. Let it be messy. Let it have plot holes the size of the Grand Canyon. You'll fix it when you edit. I think I've talked about this before, but when I used to do some film work as a costumer, there was one project I was working on where anytime there was something wrong, the director would just say, we'll fix it in post, meaning they'll fix it in post-production when they do the editing. I have that same mentality. When I am working on writing something and I'm like, this really isn't working, I'll fix it when I edit it. That's what the editing process is for. So don't get overwhelmed and don't make yourself feel bad that you're not writing in the same way that you see other people writing. And I think that's another aspect of this, and this will be my last point of this video. But one thing I tell my students is there is no one way to write. There are as many different ways of writing and as many different individual unique writing processes as there are individual unique writers. I think it's easy for beginning writers to compare their writing process to what they see famous writers doing or writers on YouTube doing. You know, I'm certainly sharing a lot about my writing process, but that doesn't mean that how you see me write these books is how you should write your own books. You need to figure out what process works for you, and it's going to be different from mine. It might have similarities because all of our writing processes are similar in some ways, but they're all different in other ways. The plot will uncover itself when it wants to, and if you're finding that most of that is kind of revealing itself in the editing process once you finish writing, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that sounds like a perfectly good and normal and healthy way to write and edit. Avi left this comment ages ago. I did a quick reply to the comment on YouTube, but I'm only just getting around to putting it into a video, and I feel like this video has turned into a very long and rambly, chatty video, but I had a lot to say about plotting, and I feel like Avi's question is one that a lot of people have. This is why I love when you guys ask questions. It's the same thing I tell my students, you know, don't be afraid to ask a question, because if you have that question, a lot of other people in the classroom probably have that question. And so I bet there's quite a few of you who are also kind of having the same struggles. So, and I've certainly struggled with this in the past, because writers online and writers like Elizabeth Gilbert, and like when you read all these craft books, they can make it sound like there's one way to write. But as we can see, Avi listed out like half a dozen or more different plot structures. So clearly there isn't just one way to write. And I don't think any one of those plot structures is better or worse than the other. I think they all suit different stories and different genres better. But even then, you can mix and match. So anyway, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna go for a walk. I will try to throw maybe some of my walking footage. I'll try to grab a few videos on my walk. The Palo Verdes are still blooming, but I hope you've enjoyed this writing vlog. But let me know if you like this kind of chatty, topic-related writing vlog, as I can definitely do more of these after my break. Feel free to leave me some videos that you would like to see me make, or some topics you'd like to see me talk about. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. There will be more of this kind of writing vlog coming very soon. In the comments, let's just chat plots. What plot structures do you like as a writer, as a reader? Or you can leave me book-related emojis in the comments. Let me know which one of you lovely people have made it this far in the vlog. I'm gonna go now, and I will see you all very soon in the next vlog. Thank you very much for watching this one. Bye!